What kind of person do you have to become in order to carry the weight of a revolution? And how do you become the kind of person ready and able to carry out a successful revolt? One that changes your family, one that changes your life, your workplace, your community, your nation, the entire world. That's what we're asking today. And to get to that answer, we've got to follow Jesus into the wilderness. In the previous scene, we watched him enter the first tier of his public campaign. And I say first tier because, as we'll see, he's strategic in everything he did. He takes his campaign from private preparation phases to the public movement phase in stages. So we saw him step into the Jordan, stand alongside everyday people, and be baptized by John. That moment was a declaration that his movement was beginning, right? A public declaration of his movement. Then he kind of disappears, not into a boardroom to map out his plans, not to a synagogue to study the scriptures or consult the experts, not into a public square or a campaign rally, not to the mountainous regions to greet other revolutionaries hiding out and waiting for their time to revolt, which was common for them to do in his lifetime. He doesn't walk into the city to celebrate the launch of his new campaign. Instead, he just disappears. He goes off the grid. He walks straight into where? The Judean wilderness. For over a month. No crowd, no speech, just silence, hunger, solitude, and temptation. What's up, everybody? I'm Tyson Putthoff, and this is scene 4 of the JesusX30 challenge. And today we're looking at Jesus's first real confrontation with the enemy. We know his public campaign is just full of confrontations with leaders and opponents of all kinds, demons. This is the first one in which he has a real confrontation with the enemy. And it's not in front of a crowd. It's not with fireworks and celebration, but it's in the dry, desolate places where character historically for the Israelite people has been shaped and their callings have been tested. And we're in the year historically, chronologically, 27 AD, early in the year, it's spring. And while the Jordan River was the setting for Jesus' baptism, what happens next unfolds adjacent to that in the Judean wilderness. If you've ever been there before, it's still a pretty harsh environment. Andy and I were there a few years ago, and it's especially harsh when you're out there. And I mean away from the towns and cities. It's dry, the hills are bleached, deep ravines, rocks, heat, exposure. It's not the kind of place you want to wander accidentally. In fact, most people in Jesus' day avoided it unless they had no other choice, except for John the Baptist. Not only that, but in the ancient world, the wilderness was viewed as this sort of nether space. It was uncivilized. It was the opposite of civilized space. It was like the Wild West, except there weren't just bandits and potential robbers, but there were also believed to be evil spirits. That's where they went and resided. There were ghosts and monsters, people believed. I mean, it was untamed geographically, it was wild anthropologically, and it was cursed spiritually. So it was to be avoided whenever possible, unless you had no other choice or unless God called you out there for a very specific reason. But Jesus doesn't avoid it. He just goes, and he goes alone. Matthew tells us actually that he's led by the Spirit into the wilderness in Matthew 4. And that's an important detail, I think, that we need to keep in mind. He didn't get lost. He wasn't running away. He was led there by the Spirit. The question is why? Because the wilderness isn't just a backdrop, and it's not just a sort of haunted space. But in the ancient Israelite memory, it's a sort of battleground. It's always been that way in the memory of Israel. This is the place where ancient Israel wandered for 40 years, learning, failing, repenting, being reshaped before entering the promised land of Canaan. This is where Elijah went when he was burned out and just ready to give up. This is where David ran from Saul when Saul was trying to kill him. This is where the prophets went to hear the voice of God. And it's where Jesus goes for 40 days before he takes his public campaign to the next level. He's not eating, he's alone, and he's vulnerable. And as we all know, those of us who know the story, that's when the enemy shows up. And what's the enemy do? Satan, what's he do? He tempts Jesus. He tests him. I think, though, what a lot of us miss is the significance of the temptations that Satan presents. I don't think we really think about the meaning and the nature of each of these and why these particular temptations were important strategically for Jesus in trying to launch his messianic campaign. I think a lot of us tend instead to focus on the fact that Jesus was tempted, but then we highlight the way he rebuts Satan's offers with scripture. And we say, see, that's why you should pray and read your Bible. But the temptations Jesus faces aren't just random challenges because Jesus is hungry or vulnerable. And they're not just examples of why we need to memorize our Bible verses. And don't get me wrong, that's critically important. I'm a Bible scholar. I believe in the Bible. Okay. But that's not the main point here. The fact is that these temptations are strategic tests. Each one targets a possible version of the Messiah that Jesus might be tempted to become, and a possible version of the kingdom that Jesus would establish. So I'll explain more, but let's break them down. First temptation, turn these stones into bread. This is not just about lunch. It's about methodology. Jesus is hungry. 40 days without food is going to do that to you. But the real question underneath all of this, when Satan asks this, is what kind of Messiah are you going to be? The temptation here is to win people by providing for their material needs. Bread's a symbol of provision, of security. And let's be honest, most movements start by promising to fix what hurts, solve hunger, patch the economy, meet the need. And Jesus could do it. And he's going to do this actually twice in his public campaign, where he creates bread and feeds the people. But not here, not now. Because this isn't about proving power. This is about proving allegiance. This is about showing where trust is rooted. Jesus replies with scripture, not as a sort of a religious comeback, but as a strategic alignment. People don't live by bread alone, but by every word from God. In quoting Deuteronomy, he's placing himself in the story of Israel in the wilderness. He's sort of embodying Israel's journey in the wilderness. And just like Israel was tested with hunger, Jesus is tested with the same. Only unlike Israel in the wilderness, Jesus chooses trust. And he's saying, I'm not going to build a movement on provision alone. I won't bribe people with comfort. I won't pull stunts and bully people and show you I'm the guy you want to follow. I'll lead them with truth, Jesus says. And it's up to them to choose their allegiance in me. The second temptation, throw yourself down from the temple. This one's all about spectacle. The temple is the public stage. It's huge in Jesus' day. To jump from it and be caught by angels, man, that would be awesome to see. But what's that really do? That's instant legitimacy. It's a spiritual mic drop. It's a show of force and power. And it sounds really awesome. But what's he really do? Prove yourself the Son of God. Make the heavenly world back you up. Give the people a miracle that they can't ignore, Jesus. Jesus doesn't take the bait. Don't put the Lord your God to the test, he says. Why? Because the moment you start needing stunts to validate your mission, you've already lost. You've lost the heart of your mission. Jesus isn't launching a circus. He's forming disciples. He's not interested in winning fans with fireworks. His movement is going to be rooted in trust and truth, not this showmanship. Third temptation, bow to me and I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. Everything you can see, I'll give you, Satan says. And this is a big one. But I want you to look closely at what Satan is actually offering Jesus here. So Satan's not offering something evil in itself. He's actually offering something that sounds like success. All the kingdoms of the world. That is, the leadership in Rome, the religious authorities in Judea, the Persians and Parthians in the east, political power, global reach, the throne, but without the thorns. So let's be honest, this is not a dumb offer. Jesus came to bring a kingdom, right? So why not just take them all now? If Jesus's goal is to establish a kingdom that's going to change the world, why not start with what's already there? Rome is powerful and wealthy. The Jewish leadership is powerful and wealthy and influential. The temple's standing there in Jerusalem. Why not just take that, what's already created, and launch his own kingdom that way? Why start from scratch? Why not pull the levers of power and just start running the world the easy way by using the political leaders and processes and systems that are already in place to carry out his desires and will for the world? Because that's ultimately what Jesus wanted. He wanted to change the world for the better of all people. And he's got the perfect kingdom to do that right now. The most powerful kingdom in the history of the world. But Jesus sees through this. Because the kingdom he's launching, the empire of God, doesn't come from the top down. It doesn't need Caesar's throne or Rome's sword. And in fact, it doesn't want those. It doesn't require wealth, armies, or political platform. And it certainly never calls for a political party. Because the second Jesus aligns his kingdom with a human empire or a human political party or with a human body of leadership, is the second his kingdom becomes co-opted by the image of that empire. And they are not the same. Good or bad, that empire could be the best empire in the history of the world. It is not the same as Jesus's kingdom. So Jesus doesn't want that. Jesus's movement is a movement of revolution. It's a movement of revolt. I've written a lot about that for those of you who have read the books. I'm also writing an entirely separate book just on Jesus as a revolutionary and his movement as a revolt. Stay tuned. But the revolution Jesus is starting grows from the margins, not the center. It spreads through surrender, not coercion. It's built on self-sacrificing love, not on controlling others. So Jesus answers very simply, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Because the fact is that humans have a tendency to worship our empires, don't we? To worship our political leaders, to worship our own political party. And the second that Jesus's empire becomes co-opted by another empire is the second that Jesus no longer has control of that empire. And it's the second that worship of God becomes commingled with worship of a leader. He knows human nature. He's not just refusing Satan. He's refusing the entire idea that to change the world, you have to align with a particular nation or empire or party or leader, and that through them, you have to dominate. He's saying, I don't need your empires. I'm building a better one. And it starts from the ground up. I don't need your politicians. I've found better leaders. And they don't come from the halls of power, but from the outskirts of society. Those are going to be my leaders. Each temptation pushes Jesus to adopt a different kind of messianic strategy. Win them with provision, win them with spectacle, win them with power. No thanks. But in rejecting each one of these, Jesus is making a choice, not just for himself, but for how he wants those who follow him to operate. If Jesus himself is rejecting that kind of messianic politic, he also calls those who follow him to reject that kind of messianic politic. So he knows, yeah, I could have done it this way and just used Rome to advance my kingdom right away. But in doing that, the example he would have left is for those who would follow him. And he would have been saying, essentially, this is how it's done. But in rejecting that, he also says, you too, those who follow me, are also to reject that. He won't be the Messiah who feeds the system. He won't be the Messiah who manipulates the crowd. He won't be the Messiah who takes the throne without the cross. He'll be the Messiah who trusts the Father, walks the hard road, builds a kingdom that doesn't look like any kingdom of this world. He's just going to start from scratch and build something new. This isn't just spiritual discipline. This is strategic resistance. Okay? I want you to hear that. This is not just spiritual discipline. This is strategic resistance. I think a lot of us look at this episode in Jesus's life and we say, well, look, Jesus went to the wilderness. He was tempted when he was vulnerable. So that means you need to be on guard whenever you're vulnerable, whenever you're hungry or lonely, and watch out for temptation because that's when Satan likes to strike. All true. But that's not the main point here. Try not to over privatize and internalize these strategic moments in Jesus's life. The bigger point here has to do with how Jesus is the Messiah and how he expects his followers to operate. with the methods of this world or the methods that Jesus is going to show us throughout the duration of his life. And his kingdom, he makes clear, it's a kingdom rooted not in domination, but in faithfulness, but in sacrifice. Jesus starts his movement in the harsh wilderness, in the desert, and he doesn't begin it with a crowd, but with a test. And I think that that should tell us something about our own walk with Jesus and about our own life and mission on this earth. The wilderness wasn't a detour for Jesus, it was a proving ground. And maybe that's why so many of us find ourselves in our own wilderness moments, not because something's gone wrong or because we've made God mad. That's shame theology, and that's not in the Bible. If somebody's telling you that, tell them to be quiet. We find ourselves in the wilderness because whether we're there because life put us there, because life is like that sometimes, or because God has put us in that spot in our life, the way the Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness. I don't know. It's different for each of us. Either way, God uses the wilderness to prepare us for something amazing. Jesus probably had fears walking out into the wilderness. Can you imagine it? Especially that first night, second night, the silence, the wild animals, the eerie sounds, the scorpions, the insects. And then you throw in hunger and thirst. You imagine the tricks your mind and your body are going to start to play on you in the Judean wilderness after a couple days, after a week, after 2 weeks, a month without food. I guarantee Jesus was afraid and struggled every moment of his time in the wilderness. But he still embraced it because he knew this is where clarity and power and confidence comes from. This is where he proves to the enemy and to himself that the movement that he's launching is about to change heaven and earth forever. So I think the invitation for us in all of this is not to rush out of our own wilderness. Sit in it and embrace it and let it do its work. The most important decisions in our lives probably won't be made on stage or in the spotlight. Most confidence that you and I can gain in ourselves and in our abilities won't be discovered in the easy moments in life. You don't win the championship without putting in the practice and the hard work behind the scenes, right? And the character and determination that is going to carry us to greatness won't come from the easy wins either. All of this is going to happen in the wilderness when no one's watching but God. One of my favorite musicians of all time is Mississippi John Hurt. He was born in 1892 in Avalon, Mississippi, deep in the rural South, at a time when obviously life was incredibly hard for Black Americans. Racial segregation was law, which meant that opportunities for non-whites were basically non-existent. And violence and poverty for Blacks were constant real world threats. Hurt grew up in that world, working the cotton fields, raising a family, worshiping Jesus, and just kind of to the side, writing and playing some of the most brilliant finger picking blues you're ever going to hear. Go and listen to his albums. One of my top 5 favorite songs of all time is his live version of I Shall Not Be Moved. He's one of a handful of people whose hands I want to shake someday in heaven. For now, one of my goals is to stop at the Mississippi John Hurt Museum. We drove within a short trip of it on our last road trip to the beach, but it was just far enough out of the way where we didn't get to stop by. Next time we're hoping to. Back in the late 1920s, Mississippi John Hurt made a few recordings and the music was brilliant, but it was kind of ahead of its time. And if you know anything about blues and different styles of blues, Mississippi John Hurt didn't quite fit what was happening in the blues scene in his region at the time. So he was a little bit ahead of its time. So the label dropped him. He didn't go on any tours, no fame, no big break. He went back to Avalon, Mississippi, where he lived with his wife and kids, took care of them, worked as a sharecropper. If you don't know anything about sharecropping, little history lesson. I know a lot of myths exist about how great it was. In reality, sharecropping was the system Mississippi John Hurt and others worked under, which was a new way to trap Black families in cycles of debt and poverty. It essentially replaced the formal slavery with a new form of labor control. And during this time, he just kept working. And from time to time, he'd play at like local events and dances in church. So he was known around Avalon, but in terms of being a star, he sort of just faded into the background. And he faded into the background for almost 40 years. And you got to understand, this 40 years, which I think is significant, wasn't an easy time for someone like John Hurt. It was working a toilsome job every day to take care of his family. It was facing ridicule every day because of the color of his skin. It was wondering and worrying if someone might decide to harm him or his family. So this 40 years for Mississippi John Hurt wasn't a picnic. It was a wilderness. Along comes the folk revival of the 1960s. This is when white people started realizing how brilliant the music of artists like John Hurt was. So some men come across his old records and go looking for him. And once they finally track him down, they're not sure if this is really the guy, still down in Mississippi. And since he didn't even own a guitar at that point, they wanted him to prove that he really was the Mississippi John Hurt of the 20s from 40 years before. So he has to borrow a guitar to audition, and the rest is history. He still got it. He blows their mind. Within a year, he's performing in Washington, D.C. in front of huge crowds at places like the Newport Folk Festival, and he's recording albums. And he dies just a few years later. But that season, those last few years were powerful. Not because John Hurt chased fame, but because after decades in his own wilderness, living life, loving his family, loving others, remaining faithful to Jesus in a time when he and other non-whites were viewed as less than human, actually less than human, he was finally seen. And somehow all that time in the background in the wilderness shaped his music into something deep and human and beautiful, and for me personally, truly life-changing. We asked at the beginning what kind of person you'd have to become to carry the weight of a revolution, and how you'd become the kind of person ready and able to carry out a successful revolution that changes your life, your family, your workplace, your community, your nation, the world, or in Jesus's case, heaven and earth. I personally don't know the answer for you. But if we do things the way Jesus did, Jesus embraced the wilderness before he launched his first campaign speeches or actions. That's where he chose what kind of Messiah he would be. No shortcuts, no ego trips, no compromise. I think it's time for us to stop seeing our own wilderness as wasted time. To stop believing the lie that we've been told that we have to be seen to be significant, or loud to be faithful, or powerful to be relevant. Jesus didn't skip the wilderness, and neither did John Hurt. The wilderness might not look like progress, but it is where things get forged. It's where depth happens, and it's where God is shaping you for the revolution that he's called you to carry out. I don't know when he's going to call you to the public scene with your revolution, with your revolt, but if you're in a wilderness right now and you're waiting for that call, stay there. It's going to happen soon. Lake Umad, go and learn. Come back next time for scene 5 of the JesusX30 30-day discipleship challenge.